Hey guys, welcome back. This is sewing tutorial number 2 for today. For this one, we're going to focus mainly on the gloves. This is the Amazing Spider-Man one, this suit right here, that we'll be sewing together. But this should work for any more advanced glove pattern that you have to work on. And I mean more advanced in that rather than just a top piece and a bottom piece sewn together in a hand shape, sort of like a kid traces a turkey on a piece of paper, this actually is a more complex pattern that has a little bit of spacing in between the fingers that gives it the shape of the finger, and is a little more comfortable, and then also has a kind of distinct thumb piece that goes around, and then a kind of advanced seam that goes between the pointer finger and the tip of the thumb. It's advanced in that you kind of have to stretch the fabric a little bit. There's less fabric on the inside of the palm and there's more fabric on the top, and what that does is it creates the curve shape you see here, where it wants my hand naturally curves like this because there's less surface area on the inside and more surface area on the top. If it was equal surface area on the top and on the bottom, it would be stretched flat all the time, and it would be extra stretched when I wanted to move my hand. So this is a little more ergonomic. It fits the shape of the hand a little bit better and is more comfortable. Another advantage of this is it's a lot easier to take off. But I'm going to go ahead and give you a little closer view here. So this is what we're going to be sewing together. You've got the top piece, that's this piece right here. You've got the palm piece, which goes around the thumb right here, comes down here, has a corner, and goes up. That's this piece. And then the thumb piece, which is this piece right here. And again, this is the Amazing Spider-Man 1 pattern, and so it looks, kind of complex, but it's a good example because it shows that you just need to break it down into the basic pieces: the top, the palm, the thumb, and then finally this long piece that usually confuses people is the finger gap I was talking about, the gap of fabric that you can kind of see in between my fingertips a little bit here, that goes all the way along, and it goes from here down, goes around both of these fingers, and then meets up here at the point. And then the top is just sewn to the bottom on the outside. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and go into it. And thanks for tuning in again, guys. And I apologize that I haven't been able to look at your comments and kind of answer questions and things like that. I'm really just trying to get this information out there because I've never really seen YouTube tutorial for this kind of sewing, this type of glove. I had to figure a lot of this stuff out myself, and it's pretty difficult, so I want to get this information out there. So to start sewing the glove, you need to begin with the finger gap that I was talking about. You start with that gap that goes between the top and the bottom half. And to do that, you are always going to have your outline piece, which is either the top or the bottom, facing up against your sewing machine. You always are using the outline that's on this of the fingers. And I did this outline with Sharpie. I just did a little dotted outline of the hand, and this is an outline that's printed directly onto my prints, so it's not necessarily going to be on every costume pattern out there, but you just need to trace a hand pattern, which is about roughly the size directly of your actual fingers. And so you have this outline pattern, and it's always going to be on top, and this piece that bridges that gap underneath is always going to be underneath, always on the bottom here, and it's the one that has to bend and move continuously to make up for the shape of the fingers. And that's how you get that piece, which is just initially flat, to go down and then up around and then up around and then end up here. So that's a kind of lengthy process. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. And the starting point is that the finger gap starts at the center of the leftmost finger. So in this instance, that's the top of the hand, and it's the pointer finger. But on the other glove, I'll point out, and that's the reason why I did this glove first, is that I had to start on the top of the palm, on the top of the pinky. Or actually, no, it was still the top of the pointer finger. I always start at the top of the pointer finger, but I actually started on the palm on the other hand, because if you think about it, on the other hand, it's the palm piece that would look like this. That would start with this finger right here, and I'd start right here. So that's how I did the opposite piece. And sometimes you have little things like that, but you're still going to have to sew it to the palm anyway. So it kind of doesn't make a difference which one you start with. It just matters that you finish one side completely first, so that you can line it up accurately with the palm piece underneath. So the first thing I'm going to do, and if you look at the finger gap piece, it's about the outline of the shape is about 1 centimeter wide. You can barely see these faint black lines that I have as its outline, but it's about 1 centimeter wide, and then it comes up to a point up here. It comes to a little tip, and that's where that point is, where it meets right at the center of the pointer finger. So I'm going to go ahead and line up that point with this top of the pointer finger. Parody Cuber, I just saw your comment that my channel needs more attention. Well, unfortunately, I'm a little hit and miss with streaming right now, because I've needed to get this stream done for like a year. I'm serious. I've needed to make these tutorial videos for over a year, and so it's kind of been affecting what I stream about for the last few months. So I'm trying to power through it here, because I need to get it done, and then I will move on to other little more up-to-date projects, like the moving lenses. I know that a lot of people are kind of holding their breath on that and have kind of lost hope, but I'll still get to it. So I'm pinning, I guess I kind of could talk about what I'm doing here. I'm pinning along this curve of the finger, so it curves right up here, and it's pretty easy when it starts, because the point, if you can see that shape, it matches that curve a little bit on the outside, because it comes to that kind of curved point. So it matches the curve of the fingertip, so it's pretty easy to line up. But you still want to put a lot of pins in there, just to make sure, absolute sure, that they're lined up. And then you go all the way to the bottom, where your two finger, your finger web is. I don't know what the finger crotch. I think Bob's Burgers called it the finger crotch. But you stop at that, and you have to even keep in mind that it doesn't just come to a perfect point. It actually stays between the two fingers. This is the gap between the two fingers. It actually stays pretty wide, and then it tapers all of a sudden into that point, and that's so that you have a lot of material there to sew your two seams together. Otherwise, you have to cut a slit right there, and if it was too close together, you wouldn't be able to sew it together right. And so you kind of have to keep that taper in mind as well when you're pinning. There's a lot of finesse to that, but if you just really pin the shape of the finger and the finger gap underneath, you shouldn't have very much trouble. And you just do that about 8 times and you should be good. And then you have to do it on the other side, so 16 times. So gloves can be a little time consuming to make. It's basically why I don't take suit commissions. I used to sew suits together for people, but they take so much time and a lot of effort and a lot of attention, and so it can be kind of stressful working on a lot of suits all the time. Anything that I've noticed, even with face shell work, if it's kind of stressful and people expect really high quality, it can just get really stressful building that stuff when you're trying to build it quickly, because you have a deadline to meet. But the quicker you try to build something, the less accurate it is, the sloppier it is. Okay, so I got down to that finger crotch area, whatever it's called, and I did a little bar tack. I went backwards so that it knots and kind of holds itself together. So I go ahead and take some tweezers. It's not coming out because I kind of don't have it in the right spot, and it just came out. There we go. Okay, so what we have is I got it pretty well on that outline for the finger gap, and so what we're left with here is the beginning of that finger. Kind of looks like a finger already a little bit. Pretty nice straight line, and has a pretty good curve shape at the top of the finger. If you have a kind of deformed finger shape, it can make it look a little deformed. So you have to really try to do that curve nice and smooth, like you're driving a car. You know, want to stay on the road. For strength, you also want to go through and do each seam again. I'm going to go after the fact and sew everything again. I'm not going to do double seams here while you're sitting and watching. But what I'm doing now is I'm trimming right along that seam I just sewed. And like the corner piece, I did a stream for this one about how the corner works, and what you need to do is you trim right up into that corner, trying to make it as clear as possible. You don't want to go too far. You kind of want to just be right next to that web. Keep in mind that if you go too far, if you trim too close to a webbing segment, it has nothing to really hold on to, and the odds are that the fabric will kind of unravel and the seam will come apart. Okay, and so now that I've trimmed the fingers apart, you can see that, you know, the fingers can kind of move separately now. I have to start lining up this next edge of the middle finger. So I actually am going to totally make my fingers here do the splits so that it just makes a total straight line between the two of them, and it matches the finger gap underneath. And that will be where I start pinning. And you actually have to even move it up a little bit first to get that tapered shape. Then continue pinning along. Really want to line everything up as best as you possibly can, because that's the only time that you can ensure that everything is lined up correctly, is right now when you're pinning everything. Otherwise, if you mess up, you have to rip your seam out and start over. Okay, so I've just gone along the straight edge of the finger, and so now I'm doing what I did initially, but kind of in reverse. I have to go up this finger bump, and rather than sew the whole finger down and do all of that at once, I'm going to stop in the middle of the pointer finger, or the middle finger up here, and I have to keep pinning along this curve, because this is where it gets a little tricky. It really has to curve a lot under the finger gap piece underneath here. Okay, so you can see that the piece underneath here has to take that pretty wild bend shape, but the pins are holding it in place. One thing I like to do is when I get to that fingertip spot, I take my tweezers here and I do two little snips right where the finger starts to curve. And this keeps the finger gap fabric from bunching up. Oh, come on. Oh, I kind of pinned it. This keeps it from bunching up and getting sewn into the seams. Instead, now it can kind of flay open like that, as you can see here. And that makes it a lot easier to sew that together. So now that those are pinned together, and then also you want to be really careful. If you're sewing spandex, you're going to make the mistake a lot. It's inevitable. You're going to sew over bunched up fabric underneath, and so you'll eventually just kind of learn a kind of like sixth sense, and you'll know when the fabric is too thick where you're sewing over, and when you're going to be sewing over chunks of stuff. But otherwise, you just need to be slow and careful. And like you can see, this chunk here, it really has a high likelihood of getting underneath and getting sewn up. So I like to twist it and kind of pinch it and then press down on it so that it's more manageable. So I'm starting all the way back in this gap here where I left off last. Right, basically where that last seam ended. Not overlapping it or anything. And I'll be going down and around this finger shape here. And bar tack. And this is when I need to really, be aware of this fabric bunching up underneath. And this is also where you want to be really careful that you do a smooth curve shape and not something kind of squared or too flat at the tip or anything like that. And you should be kind of ending with your line perpendicular to the one you were doing along the edge. All right, so that's half of a finger there. I kind of got away from it a little bit down there in the gap, but that's okay. So it's already starting to kind of do the finger gap thing. It's a little difficult to visualize here because it wants to pop outward, not inward. But when it turns into a final glove, like this one, you start to kind of have a nice shape because it all just goes in between the fingers. If you look at most professionally made gloves, they're usually made like that. It's rare that you find gloves that are just a top piece and a bottom piece sewn together. Like leather work gloves and stuff don't need to be as detailed, but most like sports gloves and gloves like that have this type of gap. There are other types of glove pattern though. It gets pretty complex. I mean, they've been making gloves for a long time. So once again, I'm pinning along this curve, and I can actually, it's kind of fighting me to make that shape. I can go ahead and make my 2 slits early on here. Oh, come on. And these just help it bend along that finger shape, because it needs to go down like that. Okay. That's funny. I just saw Najima's comment, "A man sewing? That's rare." Yeah, I guess it is pretty rare. For about 2 centuries now, sewing has been kind of deemed woman's work, but it's really when you just want something sewn together and you're tired of relying on other people to sew your stuff, like other seamstresses or your mom or your aunt or whatever. It's just nice learning the skill yourself, and then you realize it's like any other tool. You're assembling one object together with another object using string. So it's pretty easy. I think most guys could pick it up if they had the patience and the desire to. That's kind of the key. Sewing can be frustrating in the beginning. There are a lot of little errors you can make, but that's basically like everything. All right, so time to start this other edge of the middle finger. It's funny, I just saw Najima's other comment, not really PG, but women actually like it in my experience. It can be an attractive trait if you do it right. I've had one time I sewed a dress together for a girl, one of my girlfriends, and it was for a Renaissance festival, and her and her family were really impressed by that. And then while I was in college, I mentioned that like in passing to another girl, and then like 4 years later, she brought it up. She mentioned to someone else that I had sewn one of my girlfriend's a dress, and apparently that's an attractive quality if you can do that. If you can do it well, that is to say. Okay, I kind of just got the fabric outside of the foot there, but still good. All right, so you can see I've got that finger shape all sewn. Then if you look on the other side, the gap basically just loops around it. One thing, you're never, well, not never. I've sewn some pretty good gloves, but if you look right here, I actually sewed away from the outline a little bit on the finger gap piece. I sewed it pretty well on this side. I matched the shape of the finger, but on this side, I was in a little too far. And that's not going to be a huge problem. What that means is that when I'm sewing the other side, rather than sticking to the outline that I've got here, it's really faint and you can barely see it. I'm actually going to compensate. I'm going to go, I'm going to kind of do what I did on this side, but I'm going to do it again on the other side. And that will basically be unnoticeable. It will be the same thing as if I had just sewn it fine and straight. So that's kind of one little area where you have a little bit of forgiveness. So that finger's good. So once again, I go through the gap here. I'm going to trim right up into that little finger crotch area. And once again, I'm making a sort of splits between the fingers so that it starts that seam out correctly on the other side. Oops. can be difficult, but you just have to take your time and make sure everything's lined up. The pinning is most of the construction process, in my opinion. This is where you're really putting the suit together, and then the sewing is just going through and tacking your pinning down and making it a little more permanent. You couldn't wear a suit with just pins, but the pins are where all of the detail work, all that goes. I say that because when I first started out sewing, I didn't use pins at all. I didn't do this process of putting a pin in and all that sort of stuff. And so I basically, I worked really hard to try and get the shapes correct and everything, but without pinning, everything just was so super sloppy that I made. So I'm coming up to the area where it curves along, and so I can just, right here, I know it's going to be one like that. Let me make sure I'm filming this. That, like that, like that. And so that just for sure gets it down to, or allows the back piece to curve along this edge. And this will kind of be deja vu because I did this on the last finger. Like I said, this happens like 16 times. All right, just moved a little bit. Mega Masher asked a question about the spider emblem. What do you mean elaborate more on the spider emblems? You'll have to elaborate on what you want me to elaborate on. Because there's a lot of different ways to do spider emblems. If you're asking about silicone spider emblems, you can actually go and look in my video history. I did a stream with El Fet, Fernando. It was one of my first streams, actually. But we did a silicone chest spider in that video. And you can go back and look how we did that one. And then otherwise, I don't have a lot of information out on casting spiders, but there's a lot of stuff that I haven't done streams about yet, and casting and stuff is one of those things that I have a little bit of insight that I can share. I didn't bar tack that one at the beginning accidentally, so I'll probably have to go back there. And once again, bar tacking is just when you go forward and backwards a couple times, and that kind of ties a knot in the thread and allows it to stay together. But first, you always double check. You're always double checking to make sure that what you just sewed is good, it does the job. Because if you make a mistake, if you check early, it's easy to undo it and try again. All right, just strengthen the beginning of that seam a little bit. Okay, so it's going around that curve pretty nicely. It's funny. Najima keeps asking about the kind of the sex status of sewing, and like, well, how can a man sew? Is that unattractive to ladies? I think that's all pretty funny, and frankly, I think women find it kind of funny too, because it's if you do a little bit of research on where that attitude came from, it kind of came from Victorian era England. I'm not sure specifically who it was, but it was really just one guy, one writer, who basically kind of outwardly established that all cooking, all sewing, cleaning is all kind of in the domain of women, and men stick to the masculine tasks, and working, and like really it's as old as that, because if you think about a tailor, tailors used to be men. It used to be a pretty male dominated field, and chefs, and I mean all that was not quite so much as feminine as it is now, and all that stuff is kind of just stuck through those last 2 centuries. But people capable of a little bit of critical thought can see that it's not it's not something that is like inherent to men or women. It's just a tool that gets a specific thing done. But it's funny when people kind of have that attitude towards it. All right. Okie dokie, there's the ring finger, hopefully. First I have to check. Make sure everything looks good. Looks pretty good. Yeah, pretty good curve shape. All right, then I trim, and it's on to the next finger. Those tweezers are not doing the job. Always want to be careful if you're trimming or cutting like this, you're not cutting something else underneath it and weakening the fabric, or just cutting a big hole. Alright, and so this is the last time I do the finger gap, or the finger splits here, and this is the last edge, because this is the pinky finger, and it stops up at the tip of the pinky finger, a lot like it started at the pointer finger. And so what that means, there's no point on the finger gap. The finger gap is a lot longer than it needs to be. If you see here, it's got a couple inches of spare length on it, just in case something happens while you're sewing or something goes wrong. You have that as a little bit of spare length. But there's no end point on the pattern, so what you have to do is basically just pin it together, and you don't have to worry about the curve on this one. You just sew the curve into it, and it gives it the sort of point, the tapered point that it started out with on the other side. So start with it doing the splits here. Okay, so I'm finishing pinning up towards the tip of the finger. You do curve it a little bit. It's not a total just straight curve onto the finger gap underneath. I talked a little bit about invisible zippers, but yeah, if you haven't, I need to do, since I'm kind of doing a comprehensive tutorial on all of the different pieces of the suit here, it'd be a good idea for me to cover the invisible zippers as well. You can, if you just Google search invisible zipper tutorial, that's actually kind of how I learned. I just did a Google search, and there's a pretty good YouTube video. You can also find good YouTube videos on just sewing spandex and all that stuff. I've learned through those. It's always a little difficult, you know, moving the fabric where you need it to for this glove. There's a lot of fabric in a little amount of space. This is going to be a long stream. Gloves take hours to sew together. And I'm going to do the whole thing because the thing about a glove is that there are a lot of little spots where you could get stuck, where you could be, you wonder, well, what am I supposed to do right here? Like, how does it go together right here? And so I'm doing the whole thing so that if there's any spot like that, someone can come back and piece it together through this video. Okay, looks pretty good. Oh, that one got pretty far off. But once again, it's just a matter of compensating on the other side. Yeah, that's good. All right, so what I'm going to go ahead and do now is trim off those seam allowances because it kind of just gets in the way and makes everything a little more difficult to work with. More likely to sew over these seam allowances when you're doing the other side, because you're doing, sewing the other side, really getting kind of complicated with putting things together here. This is kind of as hard as sewing gets, in my opinion. Although I'm sure there's something out there that's more difficult than this. But gloves are pretty weird. Hands are pretty weird. I'm looking at comments right now, kind of catching up. A lot of conversations going on in there in the comments. Kind of hard to jump in sometimes. I see you guys talking about like paint applicator tips. It's really good that you guys are able to kind of chat in the comments and answer each other's questions and stuff. Because a lot of times, I'm just kind of talking to myself while I work. I don't get a chance to look at the comments. Okay, so this is the step we're at here. We've got the top of the hands, or the fingers, basically sewn together here. And on the bottom, you can see we've just got this gap fabric that goes up and around each finger. And at this point, we can actually trim off the excess gap there. Got some threads. It can get a little overwhelming with so many threads coming off of this thing. It's good to trim them as you go. All right, so this it's almost time to start in on the other side. Oh, I gotta close that hole up a little bit. Okay, so the next stage for sewing the palm onto the top, we're gonna basically just be going through and doing the exact same process, just starting at the tip of the pinky finger this time, because that's the furthest one to the left, and going down and around and around and then up to the top of the pointer finger. But before we do that, there's a step we have to do that I had to learn this the hard way by sewing some kind of wonky, weird gloves. What we need to do is take a Sharpie or a pen or something or chalk and mark where the base of the fingers are on the opposite side. So at that point is where the fingers stop. And then also I want to go through here and mark the very middle of the top of the finger, and do that for each of those. In between the fingers, mark that. Top of the finger, mark that. And in between, mark that. Because now I need to line those up. Because if you don't line those up, which is, like I said, I learned the hard way, then you get a really weird, wonky glove that doesn't work quite right. So now I've got that point that goes up over the finger. So I want to basically do the same thing where I'm starting. Got it going right over that. And now this gets a little more complicated because now I'm holding all of the glove, this palm piece, all of it together. And that's also, you might have noticed, I didn't sew the glove to the arm, the rest of the arm. I'm sewing the glove first before I sew the arm, because then there's a lot less stuff that I need to wrestle with as I'm sewing everything together. And then once the glove's all done, that's when I'll sew it to the arm pieces. So this one starts to get a little more tricky. This is when it gets more difficult. Because you're starting to pin, but you need to make sure, like I'm just going to go straight down to the bottom here and make sure that the finger gap here lines up with that little mark I made. Just to the inside of it. I don't want it to line perfectly up with it because the seams come to either side of it. And again, it's difficult. It's a little bit of a wrestling match trying to get it to line up properly. That's where most of the construction of sewing a suit together is at. Oop. Okay, I'm going to do one in between to get those lined up. and then sew that. Want to make sure everything's nice and flat. Once again, it's just kind of by feel. And I'm starting right where that point and the top of the glove meet. And you can kind of make that curve, what I'm doing right here, with the needle inside of the fabric. You lift up on the foot and you can rotate the fabric around and kind of make your turns like that. That's kind of sewing 101. And hopefully if you're watching this tutorial and gleaning information from it, you're aware of that already, because this is pretty complex sewing. All right. Well, that didn't line up very well. You can see, I don't know why that happened. Must have been the way I unpinned it or something, but I'm way off from my mark, and I sewed out a little bit. But that's kind of just the stuff that happens, especially when you're doing this second half, which is more difficult. But that's also why we don't do a super strong seam right off the bat to start with. You do a kind of weaker seam that you can take apart easily, because this didn't quite make the correct shape. Usually you'd use a seam ripper, but I don't have one. Just getting that chunk of thread out from where I bar tacked it. It's kind of the nice thing about sewing is it's a little forgiving depending on what you're doing. All right, there we go, like it never happened. Minus a couple little possible marks in the fabric, but you don't really see that in spandex. Okay, so that lets me back up a little bit and try again. Hey Alexander, I'm not sure what your email was about. I'm sorry about that. I'm pretty notoriously bad about answering emails and sitting down and getting to that. I apologize about that. It's not very fun. I always feel pretty bad, but I still do it. I'm just very, very bad about responding to people in a timely manner. Part's fighting me. A little bit of a battle here. There we go. Make sure everything's flat underneath. Otherwise you have a high chance of just sewing through a huge chunk of fabric you don't mean to sew through. Alright, a little bit better that time. You can see that now this time both edges of the finger are about the same length. They reach about the same point. And I couldn't go on with that being different, because then everything else subsequently would be a little off, unless you stretch it out a little bit. But now I am just continuing on same way I was on the first side. Thanks for tuning in again, guys. It's fun to have you guys sit here, watch me sew. I know that realistically, maybe not any of you will ever sew a glove together like this, but a tutorial like this, I've never seen one on YouTube. So, like on the other side, I've got these little bits I can trim, but I know exactly where it needs to curve now. So I can just trim those right away like that. So now it can sit nice and flat. You can imagine how it would sit flat against the part we're about to pin. So actually, I'm just going to go ahead and start by pinning the center where I'm going to end. And I want to get it really lined up with my middle mark on the finger. All right, pinned around that edge. Hydron, I saw your comment a little bit. I just neglected to answer it. I forgot. Hydron asked about the 7-piece Spider-Man suit, which basically just means it's gloves, a shirt and pants, boots, and then the mask. So it's like what the suit is like in the comic book that actual Spider-Man wears. And the reason why most people don't do that is because with spandex, you run into the problem really quickly of like boots or gloves. Unless you have like snaps or Velcro or hooks, the spandex gloves and the spandex boots won't want to stay up. They'll slide down. Really quick, going back to the glove, this is a kind of a new stage of kind of managing the fabric underneath. See, these seams right here want to kind of move up and get in the way of where I'm going to be sewing. So I've really got to make sure that they're pushed back, kind of folded back like this. And then when it gets to the fingertip, I've got to do what I did before and kind of pinch it and bundle it all up like that so it's not in the way of where it's going to be sewn. So once again, it's just a sort of sixth sense you learn, knowing, like I've got my fingers pressed all over it, and I just know by feel when I've got too many layers of fabric underneath and I'm about to sew over too many layers of fabric. But back to the 7-piece suit, like I was saying, you run into problems where the gloves don't stay all the way up. If you have a shirt part and a pants part, if they don't attach to each other, then the shirt is probably going to go up and the pants are probably going to ride down. So it's kind of just, that's why most people stick with single piece one suit. It just ends up looking a lot cleaner and together. Those are the little things that you learn along the way. You don't even anticipate the little problems like that, and in your imagination, it's just going to be a perfect Spider-Man suit that doesn't, get saggy and wrinkly or anything. But you learn once you're done. It's not impossible. You can definitely do like hooks and you can do like hooks or Velcro or a lot of little things you could do to make it work. But I think you're always going to run into trouble where it looks a little weird in some spot or another. So that's why most people stick with the non-separating suit. But it's cool. What I like to do is rather than having like the gloves come completely off and the boots come completely off, is I like to put zippers into the gloves and then zippers into the boots. Or, well, usually just the gloves. I don't care as much about the boots. But you put zippers into the seams around those edges, and then you can take your hands out. You unzip your zippers and you can just take your hands out like that. Okay, so it's already going pretty well here. Already kind of starting to take on that glove shape. Just need to continue sewing along that edge shape here. That one blue guy, he said, "Can you make an It suit?" I think you're probably talking about the movie that just came out a few weeks ago. I could, but that's not really my area. Like the It suit is like clown makeup and the prosthetics, and I can do that stuff, and I have a little bit of knowledge. It's just not really like what I gravitate towards. I'm more into like armor and suits and stuff like that, and I've never had a huge interest in kind of like the horror, grotesque, making monsters and gore and stuff like that. I've just never really been attracted to that stuff very much. I got into it because I like things like Iron Man suits and Spider-Man suits, and when I was a kid, I thought Power Ranger suits were really cool. I thought those movie Power Ranger suits from the first movie back in the 90s were really cool. It was cool. The reboot that they did recently was pretty cool. They had a really neat history to the armor, sort of, with the way they kind of made it look like a naturally occurring mineral. I thought that was neat. It just kind of gave it an alien look to it, which was something that is always missing. Whenever people try something like that, I need one more pen. Whenever people try something like that, it always ends up looking very earthly and metal and stuff. I thought they did a good job, but it's just not quite Power Rangers in my opinion. It just wasn't what I remembered from my childhood. Oh, are you talking about the It suit has like a shoulder puff? I'm not quite sure. I'd have to look at it and kind of look at it for a little while. But I'm sure there's something you could do. You could always, You could do just kind of standard pillow stuffing. You can buy big bags, or you can just use old pillows that aren't comfortable anymore. You just rip all the stuffing out, and then you just sew together your shoulder things or whatever, and then stuff them with that stuffing. But again, I'd have to look at it, and I can't think of what they look like off the top of my head. Or you could give it a kind of wire shape. You could build like a wire structure underneath. Oh, I hope I lined that up properly. We'll see. It's getting dark here in LA. I like this time of year when it's almost Halloween. As usual, I'm sewing together someone else's costume, but I have my plans for this year. I never got to wear my Harvey Birdman suit out, so I think I'll probably do that one. Yeah, Jonathan was referring to the Power Ranger comments I was making earlier. I didn't really like the design of the armor either. Like I was saying, I like the kind of effect, like the kind of material effect, but yeah, I didn't really like the shapes of the suits and the helmets. I saw those pre-production versions that looked a lot better. I kind of want to do like a White Ranger. He was always my favorite. It'd be fun to do like a White Ranger interpretation and 3D print that. I wanted to do that for a little while. And I'm getting caught up on projects, so maybe soon I can. Oh yeah, working away from the camera. Okay, time to do the ring finger. Well, so maybe this doesn't take as many hours as I thought it did. Maybe it just feels like it takes several hours. Time's funny like that. That one blue guy, I just saw your comment about the bulge in the crotch. There are quite a few things you can do about it. Some people wear bicycle shorts. You might have access to those easily. But those can kind of show edges where the bicycle shorts end. And what dancers have done for centuries, male dancers, is called a dance belt. And a dance belt is this it's basically just a male thong. It goes in between your butt cheeks. It's the most uncomfortable thing in the world. It basically smooths everything out. You have to wear it correctly. I don't want to get too explicit here, but you have to, you've got your frank and beans. You have to wear your frank up. It has to be pointing up. That's kind of one contingency. Some people put on a dance belt and they're like, oh, it's not doing anything. It's not smoothing out the shape. You got to wear the frank pointing up, straight up, and the beans just go underneath. And that does a good job of smoothing everything out. That's about as good as you can get unless you have like a piece of like latex or silicone that actually smooths the shape out. But there's nothing really like that. But dance belts are what professional male dancers have been using for centuries. So I think that's probably the most official answer to that question. Some people just don't like it. Jonathan, yeah, that's something that I had someone else have a problem with and hadn't even considered. That those white fog-free lenses, I don't like doing those anymore because of that reason, because they're just not durable enough for everyone's purposes and just even the shipping process. So I really, unless I found a more viable solution for that mesh, I don't really like those anymore. But yeah, what you can do is take like a hair dryer or something like that, and you can kind of heat it up and have the dome shape facing down. So heat it like you're heating a little bowl, like the lens is a little bowl. And then as you heat, it'll kind of just droop naturally because it's drooping downward. And that's kind of how you make your shape if you're reshaping the lens. I really hate that happened to people, and there's not a lot I can do about it either after the fact. And as I was shipping them in the summer, I only had one person who commented about that, but I'm sure it happened to more people. But it was mainly this summer that started happening as it heated up, and it's when a box gets shipped, it probably sits in a hot truck in a hot warehouse, and so it's difficult to ship those things without exposing them to that heat right away. Yeah, I do feel bad about it though. I knew that plastic mesh is very temperamental. It's very thin, and there's not much plastic there, so it doesn't take much heat at all to heat it up and change the shape of it. This is also the tutorial I wanted to do a week ago on Saturday, but my phone, I realized it wasn't YouTube's fault. It wasn't the YouTube app. It's my phone being really weird. My phone will turn sideways for some stuff, but it won't turn horizontal for other things, like the YouTube live streaming function. But it turns horizontal in some of the other YouTube app functions, so it's really weird. And then I also had some roofers coming over all of last week that made it so I couldn't stream like this because there'd be loud thumping going on. But they're gone now, thankfully. So finally I can stream. Alexander, I don't have any sales stuff going on right now. Maybe in the near future, though. I'm kind of catching up and getting a little more proficient at taking out those face shells when I have orders for them. But still no info on that right now, and I'm hesitant to talk about it during the streams. Camo Man, I don't know what your question, does it morph any of the Glive? I don't know if you meant glue or what, but no, I don't experience much morphing happening when I sew. Oh, glove. Does it morph any of the glove? Still not really sure what you mean, but I mean it does. There's some morphing sort of stuff, like you're stretching some parts and kind of. I spoke about it in the beginning. You stretch some parts so that it curves the fabric naturally to meet the curve of your hand. Okay, almost done with this little finger gap part, and then that's when you begin the rest of the glove construction. Okay, and once again it's this wrestling match, trying to get the fabric to lay down flat. Have a little bit that came on kind of misplaced. I think I can get it with my finger. Okay, it's a little tight, but I think that should have gotten it. All right, excellent. So it meets a little point up there, and it kind of sets it up for the next steps here, where I start to sew the actual top part of the glove to the palm part of the glove, now that this gap is in here and in place. Here, I'll trim really quick and then I'll show you how it looks. There's a lot of seam trimming like this because you have to trim your seam allowances like this so that when you're sewing over certain seams, there's not a whole big bulky amount of fabric that you're sewing over. But once again, that's basic sort of sewing stuff. And you probably know more about sewing if you're watching this. Ooh, I kind of missed right there, so I'm going to sew that again. Still missed. Oops. And I sewed over what I trimmed over a little bit. Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but what I'm talking about is there's a little bit of fabric here that's right up against the edge. I don't know how that got trimmed like that before I sewed it. I kind of need to do it from the other side. I guess I can't. Okay, so I'm about ready to do the next step here. Right at this pinky here. That's where I'll start. So now I'm sewing the edge of the palm to the edge of the top of the hand. And it comes down to a corner here. You can see that there's this weird little corner piece, and this is actually the bottom of the wrist on either side. That's where these two pieces meet up. They come around and form the bottom of the wrist. And so the palm has to come down along this edge, and then it has to line up down there, and then it has to meet over here. And so that's the step that we do now, basically. We do this edge here. And there are a couple things to line up. Oops, I never trimmed that. Alright, now I'm going to go all the way down to this corner, which is right about down in here. And it's a little difficult to see because there's so many pieces laminated together, but it's there. Now I'll pin up the rest. Oops. And these are two matching curves. They're not just perfectly straight lines, so you have to really pin it and line everything up. Okay, so now that those are pinned together, I just start from where those three pieces all come to a point up there. I just start from that point. Yeah, so I wanted to ask, what is everyone going to be for Halloween? What are people's Halloween costume plans? You can comment, and then hopefully I'll see it. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of Spider-Man out there, especially the year of the movie. It gives you an excuse to wear Spider-Man for Halloween. Not like you need one, but if you're just Spider-Man for every Halloween, it gets, you know, a little mundane. Okay, so I've dealt with just that edge right there. Sewed it on either side. Starting to really turn into a glove. I could kind of turn it inside out and have it into an actual glove shape. Just gonna go ahead and strengthen and reinforce that seam really quick. Oh, that's cool. Stark suit Spidey, basically Iron Spider-Man. Spider-Man. That's basically Iron Spidey, I'd say. Okay, so now this is a lot like the corner that we did in the stream before this one. So there's a corner right here, and so in order to line that up, I'm going to trim right up next to the seam. Oh yes, another thing, this is the seam, basically this seam right here is going to be going along the bottom of the palm here. And so it's going to cross the seam that goes down and begins the arm inseam. And so I'm going to go ahead and start that arm inseam. Just do a little bit of the arm inseam. And that's, you know, the simple, you know, kind of folding it together like it's a sleeve on any shirt. This point right here and this point over here is where it meets the palm. So I'm going to go ahead, get that pinned. And there are webs to line up here, so I have to be a little conscious of that. There's one web right here that has to be lined up with that one. I can see it through the fabric a little bit, but I don't have it marked. And that's only as much as I want to do right now. I don't want to do that much more because I want to do it with red thread. Oops, hit my pin. That's why I like to take the pins out. And then I'm going to make this one really strong, because this seam right here, this spot particularly, will have a lot of stress from being pulled on and off. Okay, so it's basically coming together as a glove here, if you can kind of imagine what it will look like turned inside out. Just missing the thumb right in here, but that's going to be the next step once I get this seam across the bottom of the palm done. First things though, I'm going to trim along what I just did, because like I said, it's going to intersect that seam, so we want to trim it now so that there's not a lot of seam allowance inside of that intersected seam, if that makes sense. So it'll line up like this to there. Okay, I need to trim a little bit in the thumb here because I'm having trouble stretching it out. Jonathan just asked about the zipper foot and why not use the zipper foot all the time. The zipper foot is just not quite as good at pressing all of the fabric down flat and kind of uniformly moving it through. The zipper foot kind of presses on one side and the other side kind of fluffs up a little bit. So sometimes the zipper foot can be a little difficult. And that's why I only use it for hiding webs. Now here's another thing. These two edges have got a part where the red and the blue parts end. So the red part ends and it turns blue, and that happens on both sides. So you actually have to line that up. You know, if you can kind of visualize what I'm talking about right here, those parts have to line up. Because little things like that, if they don't line up just right, they kind of are what catch your attention when you're looking at a suit like this. Especially when you put so much work into detailing it, then the little flaws that are there kind of get louder. Kind of is the frustrating aspect of pursuing really high accuracy stuff. So once again, I've got webbing lines. They're very light here. You can't see them very well on the opposite side of the fabric, but there are two webbing segments to line up with corresponding web lines on the other side. It doesn't have to be too perfect because the palm is hard, gloves are hard, and it's not the most focused on area, but you just want to be slow and careful with it. Now once again, sewing this corner, you don't want to let it bunch up and then you accidentally sew over something you don't intend to sew on. Starting where that last webbing segment left off. Right here, there we go. Thread. So now I'm just only going across the bottom of the palm. And this is another one of those seams that's going to have a lot of stress, so it needs to be strong. Okay, so it goes along the bottom of the palm there, and it cuts along where it intersects with the wrist. So now you can kind of see the shape it's taking. How it becomes a glove like that. I could even trim this exterior seam allowance a little bit. Okay, so there you can kind of see a little bit better how the palm is just on the palm, and then the upper piece is on the top of the hand, and then it also comes together underneath and goes all the way around the arm. Starts off the arm piece like that. You can kind of see that. Okay, so now that I've got that seam in there, I'm going to trim it because it's going to intersect with the thumb I'm about to sew on. I'm actually going to strengthen that one a little bit too while I can. So for the thumb, this one's a little more complicated, than most thumbs usually are, because it has this corner. I'll grab the finished glove over here so you can see the thumb comes in and there's this corner detail, and that's only this ASM1 pattern. It has a corner right here and a corner right here, and it makes the blue shape kind of go around the thumb in that shape. For most standard thumbs, it's just a curve, and it's a lot easier than this corner. But since I'm doing this ASM1 suit just so that I have the information out there, I'll show you how I deal with that. Basically, it's like any other corner where you have to deal with one line and then you deal with the other one that intersects. So I'll go ahead and pin this one edge right here. It's going to be difficult. This is going to be a hard one to sew. It always is. You even have to snip up into this corner to allow it to open up for you. So starting at that corner where the top of the hand meets the corner of the thumb. A little difficult to explain, but hopefully you can visualize it. All right. And since it's curved this direction on this side and this direction on this side, you just have to force them to meet in the middle. That's how you get those two shapes to come together. And I'm actually going to put an extra pin there at the end just to keep them lined up. Making sure everything's nice and flat. You don't want to sew over any wrinkles or bumps. Up into that corner. All right. So now that it's up into that corner, check and make sure that everything's placed pretty well. Looks good. Now is when I begin on the other end of that, other side of the corner. This is a difficult one. It's definitely fights you a little bit. That's funny, reading you guys' cult comments. Cults are very funny, considering we're living in the middle of one right now. Cult of personality. We all live in Trump Town, if you live in America. I don't want to get too political, because I don't know what people's views are, and I don't want to alienate anyone, but cults are bad. All right, sewing around the thumb. Okay, I pinned around all the way around, and it even went over onto the palm, because the thumb is attached to the palm. Really difficult, even though you just have to kind of takes experience. I don't know what else to tell you. Sometimes you just kind of need to mess it up a million times before you finally, the light bulb clicks on, and it's like, oh, I need to make really, really good sure before I start sewing that everything is really laid out flat. Otherwise, I'm going to sew over a bunch of fabric that I didn't intend to sew over and spend 15 minutes taking it apart. Come on, pin. Yeah, this is a really tough seam. Yes, this Spider-Man glove will be complete. Eventually. The whole suit should be done on either tomorrow or Thursday, and then should either be debuting at Comic-Con on Friday or Saturday, I'm not sure when, but it'd be really cool to see this one done. It's a very neat suit. Alright, let's see if I just sewed over any bunched up fabric. Wow, I didn't. That's surprising. So I need to kind of turn it out inside out now to make sure that that looks good. I'm not going to turn the fingers inside out yet. That's kind of a struggle, especially with puff paint fingers. Just looking at the thumb right now. Looks good. I can get the thumb and pointer finger out here now. Okay, so you can see how the way I sewed the thumb on. Now all that's left is the way the thumb and the finger come together. That's the last opening on the glove. And this is the kind of advanced Spandex technique that I talked about in the beginning of this video, in the beginning of some of the other ones. And what that is basically there's less surface area on the bottom of the hand. So this is the bottom of the hand, this is the palm. It's shorter. It's a very much smaller distance to the inside of the thumb than you have on the top, like a whole lot shorter. It's a pretty crazy distance. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can kind of fudge it with the distance between the thumb, but you just have to really stretch out the bottom palm part while you're sewing the top part. You see how when I stretch out the bottom palm, it allows that top part to go a little bit more flat. And so this is the most radical stretching while sewing that's done on the whole suit. Maybe the closest is when you're doing the boots. Oh, and once again, since I'm sewing along here, I'm going to be intersecting these seams, so I need to go ahead and trim them right now. And I might also really quick want to go ahead and strengthen that a bit. This is one of the other really heavily strained pieces of the suit. The glove just goes through a lot. Your hands go through a lot. Especially when you're dressed as Spider-Man. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and trim that. Okay. So I'm starting right there in the thumb, joint area where it meets between the two, just to get it lined up. And so I'm going to go ahead and get the thumb where I'll be starting lined up. And the thumb is easy. It's just the two halves sewn together. Well, it's fun to be streaming again. This is another one of those longer streams that, I kind of in hindsight, I wonder, like, did anyone even really, or is anyone even going to watch, and come back and watch it? I think for this one, it's good because it's a technique that is pretty important. Just sewing gloves, it's pretty crucial, but it's not all over the place. I haven't seen other glove tutorials. There might be other glove tutorials out there. And if they are, they're probably a little better, but I'll get there. I'm learning. But it's good to be back. Good to be back streaming. Took too long of a break. Okay, so just going along the length of the thumb. want to stretch it a little bit so that it has some stretch to it. Put a bar tack down here to make it a little stronger. And now this is the stretch time. This is when you really have to stretch it. So much so that it just made the fabric move a little bit. There we go. Easy to get back on track. I accidentally didn't put the outline on this red piece right here, but I know the shape well enough by heart. And then that meets up to the first, where we started an hour and a half ago. First seam at the tip of the pointer finger. Ooh, I made that a little too pointy, I think. Yeah. I might have to redo that. Or I could just kind of smooth it off. I better redo that. Otherwise, usually it's not a big deal, but this ASM1 costume has some details on the palm. Just when you think you're done. So I just needed to snip a thread on either side, because when you sew, it's two threads getting kind of woven together that bind the fabric together. So you just need to get each of those threads snipped, and then you can just pull it out and continue to trim it up a little bit as you go. All right, okay. Finish this right. Well, I better pin it so that doesn't happen again. It probably will do exactly the same thing. Starting a little further back because I need to go over this other thread to strengthen that little cut I made. That one blue guy, I just looked up and saw your comment about flash stuff. If you're new and you're kind of starting out and you can't, like, I don't know, 3D print. 3D printing is kind of turning into the best method for making a lot of different pieces of a suit. But if you can't do that, then you could always sculpt the mask on a bust of your head or any kind of similar sized bust. And that's kind of a good way to learn the basics of sculpting and casting and stuff. So maybe that would be a good project to take on. That's how I did a similar kind of project with Batman, back when Batman Begins came out in 2005 or something. That suit was just so cool. It still is. I mean, the way the Kevlar armor looks at the very beginning when Fox takes it out of the drawer. They did such an amazing job with that suit. It's like the coolest armor out there. And then they paint it black, which it still looks cool, but Those Nolan Batman movies have really cool suits. But that I learned sculpting and casting and stuff a lot from working on that. It just takes that drive, the desire to work on something like that. Okay, so now I need to tackle all these little threads before I turn these fingers inside out. Okay, pretty good. All right, so the glove is, for the most part, done. You can see it's inside out right now because that's the way we constructed it, but now that it's done, I can begin the sort of fun process of slowly working it inside out. I mean, I can't be too... If it was just regular spandex, this would take a second. But because it's got all the puff paint on it, and because it's all the different layers sewn together, it takes a little bit longer. It takes a little more work coaxing. And eventually you need like a Sharpie. You know, a Sharpie's got that kind of miniature finger and a nice smooth rounded shape, so it's not going to catch or scrape the inside at all. Alright, I got the thumb. You really have to work to get them separated because it'll stay kind of folded up on you. Oh yeah, this will be fun. Okay, I'm going to start with the pinky. Because they're all twisted up and balled up in there. There we go. Stick a Sharpie in, and then you just kind of push on the edge, and you get it up in there. And then from the inside, here's a pinky. Got some loose red threads hanging off that I'll trim. Ooh, that was easy. Oh no. That hole that I thought I sewed well enough kind of popped back up. I'll have to turn that inside out and deal with it again, fix it up. But that's the only finger I'll need to turn inside out to fix. I acknowledged the cult a little while ago. Just also think that cults are one of the worst things in the universe. So even joking about them, I hate cults. But haha, cults, funny. Like, cults are seriously one of the scariest things. People who get together and they shut out facts, they shut out reason, they just follow blindly. It's spooky. They can do some dangerous stuff. All right, excellent. Oops. I need to take off my cool pin thing. But for the most part, when you're working with puff paint and you're putting on a puff paint costume, think of it like a latex balloon that you blow up for like a party. You need to stretch it out a little bit and kind of warm it up. The puff paint kind of gets cold and stiff when it sits in your closet forever. And so the first time you put on a glove or the suit in a long time, you kind of got to really work it and warm it up. And then once it gets a little warmer, it'll be easier to deal with and put on. And I'll say the puff paint makes this a tight costume for sure. It makes the spandex much less flexible. But there we go. In the length of the stream. Here's that hole I was talking about. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but I'll go back and fix that. Just turn it back inside out and patch it up. But yeah, there's the palm. You can see this corner that we made. Came down, went around the corner, went around the bottom of the palm, and then intersect with the thumb. All that. It's just it's a puzzle that you have to put together, and it's a puzzle I've put together dozens of times, so I've got some insight into the process. But not too difficult, and it definitely makes a much higher quality glove, because if you've ever worn the type of glove that just is the top half sewn together with the bottom half, it is so hard to get the glove off, whereas with this, it's like an actual glove, like a tighter fitting like dress glove or something, not hard at all. Just have to kind of pull them off a little bit because they don't have to stretch that much. So yeah, that's basically it for sewing together a more advanced, detailed glove. That'll work for basically any glove pattern that follows the kind of Sam Raimi Spider-Man suit pattern. And you can find patterns like this on my Sell-Fi page. I mean, I probably should have said that at the beginning, if anyone's even still watching at this point. 2 hours in. Looking at comments. Funny. I love these comments. It's one of my favorite parts of the stream. Josh, to glue your lenses to the soda bottles, I mean, you can pretty much use any glue that, like super glue, or you could use Go-To, which is kind of like a more of a thicker glue that kind of bridges gaps, but you can find that at the store. It's just called Go-To. That stuff's pretty handy. Glue, it dries pretty fast and everything. Yeah, so that pretty much does it for, go back to this view. Now I'm just having done 2 hours of glove sewing work. But it was fun. Got to sew the glove together. I'm this much closer to having the suit finished now. I've got both gloves. If you know about making and sewing suits, having both gloves done, I mean, you're basically over halfway done at that point, just because the gloves are so much little minute detail. So yeah, I only have another day or two to sew this thing, or left to sew this thing. Well, obviously to sew it, but that's all that is left. So it'll time nicely with LA Comic Con, which comes up on this Friday. I don't know if you're in the Los Angeles region, but LA Comic Con, you should definitely go. It's fun. But cool. That's that's all I have for today, and I might be back pretty soon. I think when I have the suit more finished, I'm going to come back and do streams about some of the stuff I talked about with the suit once it's done, because it'll just be easier to talk about how things go together, like the belt and the back piece. I also only realized after the fact that the audio wasn't playing while I was looking at my computer yesterday, and that was a big issue with, I explained a lot of stuff, and so you only see me talking over, or you only see the pictures and not me talking, so, oh well. That's basically it for today, though. If you're still here and if you hung out all 2 hours, thank you. I appreciate the viewership and having everyone tune in. Cool. Thank you. Bye.